August 25, 1944. The summer dust hangs thick over the roads leading east from Normandy, a fine powder that coats everything: uniforms, faces, the shattered hulks of panzer tanks abandoned in ditches like the discarded shells of iron beetles. In a commandeered chateau outside Chartres, a German general sits at a mahogany table too elegant for the collapse unfolding around him. His maps are outdated. His supply lines are phantom threads on paper that no longer correspond to reality. Through the tall windows, he can hear something that makes no tactical sense. The unbroken growl of engines, a mechanical thunder that does not pause, does not rest, does not conform to any doctrine of logistics he has studied in 3 decades of military service. It is the sound of 400 trucks moving in an endless convoy, and it is the sound of Germany losing the war. He had calculated everything: the distances, the fuel consumption, the inevitable friction of supply chains stretching from coastal depots to advancing armies 400 miles inland. According to every principle of military logistics, according to the mathematics that had governed warfare since Napoleon, the American advance should have stalled weeks ago. Armies cannot outrun their supply lines. This was not opinion, it was physics, it was history, it was the iron law that had strangled every deep penetration offensive since men began keeping records of such things. The Germans knew this intimately. Their own blitzkrieg into Russia had devoured itself when trucks ran dry and horses collapsed, and the Wehrmacht learned that conquering space meant nothing if you could not fill that space with food, fuel, and ammunition. The Americans, racing across France in the late summer of 1944, should have been experiencing the same inevitable attrition. Their tanks should have been silent monuments along the roadside. Their infantry should have been walking. Instead, they were accelerating. What the general could not see from his chateau, what defied the elegant equations of his staff officers, was a logistical miracle so audacious it bordered on the absurd. The Red Ball Express, a convoy system that moved supplies 24 hours a day along a dedicated one-way loop of French highways marked with red balls painted on roadside posts. Over 5,000 trucks, driven primarily by African-American soldiers of the Quartermaster Corps, hauling everything an army in motion required: ammunition, rations, fuel, medical supplies, spare parts, mail from home. At its peak, the Red Ball moved 12,000 tons of supplies per day, a figure so staggering that even Allied planners initially doubted the system could sustain itself. German intelligence officers, when they first received reports of the operation's scale, dismissed them as Allied disinformation. No army in history had ever maintained such a flow of material over such distances. It was impossible.
But impossibility has always been a matter of industrial capacity and national will. The American military had learned from its own history of continental expansion, from building railroads across deserts and supplying armies across the Pacific, that logistics was not merely support, it was the weapon itself. While German planners, trained in the traditions of Clausewitz and Moltke, viewed supply lines as necessary constraints, American doctrine treated them as problems to be solved through overwhelming material abundance and systematic organization. The trucks that made up the Red Ball were not elegant machines. They were GMC 2.5-ton cargo trucks, mass-produced in Detroit and shipped across the Atlantic by the thousands, designed for function rather than finesse. Each truck could carry 5 tons. Each convoy contained 40 trucks. The convoys ran in continuous rotation, one heading east loaded with supplies, another returning west empty to reload, the cycle never breaking, the highway never silent. The drivers endured conditions that would have been considered impossible in any previous conflict. They drove for 20 and 30 hours at a stretch, navigating bombed-out roads and improvised bridges, denied headlights because of the threat of Luftwaffe night fighters, guided only by the dim cat-eye lights of the truck ahead and the painted red balls that marked their route through the darkness. They operated without adequate sleep, without proper maintenance facilities, pushing engines until they seized, and then cannibalizing parts from disabled vehicles to keep the convoy moving. The accident rate was catastrophic. Trucks overturned on curves taken too fast, drivers fell asleep at the wheel and plunged into ravines, mechanical failures turned vehicles into roadblocks that had to be cleared in minutes rather than hours. Yet, the system absorbed these losses and continued. For every truck that broke down, another took its place. The conveyor belt of American industry had learned to compensate for attrition by building more, faster, cheaper. German generals, raised in a military culture that prized elegance of execution and economy of force, could not comprehend the brute arithmetic of American logistics. They had expected the traditional calculus. Advancing armies would outrun their supplies, be forced to halt and consolidate, creating windows for counterattack and defensive stabilization. Instead, American armor columns were refueled in the field while still in motion. Supply dumps were established and abandoned and established again, like chess pieces moving across a board that kept expanding. The Wehrmacht had fought the Soviet Union to a standstill partly through the Russian winter and partly through the collapse of Soviet logistics in 1941. They had assumed the same principles would apply in the West. They had not accounted for an enemy that could produce trucks faster than they could destroy them, that could replace losses overnight, that treated the logistical tail not as a vulnerability to be protected, but as an asset to be expanded without theoretical limit. The symbolic image that recurred in German situation reports and captured documents was not a weapon but a tire. The endless rolling of rubber on pavement, the mechanical heartbeat of the red ball that never flatlined. Japanese officers studying German intelligence briefs in Tokyo noted with alarm that American logistics had achieved a kind of industrial perpetual motion. One German logistics officer, captured during the Battle of the Bulge, told his interrogators that his greatest shock was not the quality of American equipment, but its quantity, the sense that destroying one convoy meant nothing because 3 more were already on the road behind it. He described watching a Red Ball convoy pass through a captured French town at night, the line of trucks stretching beyond the horizon in both directions, and realizing that Germany was not fighting an army, but an economic system that had converted its entire industrial base into a weapon of sustained momentum. The Red Ball Express operated for 83 days, from August to November 1944, delivering over 400,000 tons of supplies before the opening of Antwerp's port provided a more permanent solution. Its drivers, many of whom faced segregation and discrimination within their own military, proved that the capacity to deliver abundance was as decisive as the capacity to inflict destruction. They transformed the European theater from a war of maneuver into a war of consumption, where victory belonged not to the side with the cleverest tactics, but to the side that could sustain operational tempo without pause. In that chateau outside Chartres, the German general folded his maps and understood what his training had never prepared him to accept, that modern war was no longer won by brilliant generals, but by accountants and factory workers, and tired men driving trucks through the night. The growl of engines on the highway was not merely transportation, it was the sound of industrial democracy in motion, the proof that a nation capable of producing limitless materiel could rewrite the rules of warfare itself. The Red Ball Express did not conquer through firepower, it conquered through the simple, relentless fact of arrival. Supplies delivered, armies fed, momentum sustained until there was nowhere left to retreat and nothing left to defend. The tire rolled on and the war rolled with it, and no equation in the German staff manuals had accounted for an enemy whose answer to every problem was not elegance, but abundance without end.